What happened when AOC mocked his law degree and 47 seconds later? Kennedy crushed her with one sentence, was the kind of political moment that replays in slow motion across every screen in America. The setting was a high-profile congressional hearing on education reform, where tensions had already been running high. John Kennedy, always measured but never afraid to strike, sat quietly reviewing his notes until Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took the microphone and decided to go off script. AOC was in full rhythm, her voice rising as she accused the Republican side of the aisle of willful ignorance and fancy degrees that don't translate to moral clarity. She turned to Kennedy and, with a smirk, added, "No offense, Senator, but I've heard more common sense from bartenders than from some Ivy League lawyers." The room buzzed. Cameras zoomed in on Kennedy's reaction. He didn't blink. Didn't flinch. He just raised one eyebrow and waited. The pause alone was enough to build tension. And then Kennedy leaned forward slowly, placed his glasses on the desk, and replied in that unmistakable Louisiana drawl. "Well, Congresswoman, I reckon if common sense were liquor, you wouldn't make a thimble's worth." The room froze. Gasps echoed across the chamber. Some aides even laughed out loud before slapping hands over their mouths. AOC's smile flickered for the briefest second and then vanished. In just 47 seconds, the tables had turned. AOC had aimed to embarrass Kennedy, but it backfired spectacularly. What she'd framed as intellectual elitism, Kennedy rebranded as humility and wit. And unlike most viral clapbacks, this one came wrapped in Southern charm and delivered without shouting. It was smooth, sharp, and devastatingly effective. Even some members of her own party looked stunned. The hearing was live, and there was no way to edit around it. AOC tried to recover by doubling down, asking if Kennedy thought education was irrelevant. The damage had already been done. Kennedy simply replied, "I think education is important, Congresswoman, but so is knowing when you're outmatched." That sentence, too, echoed through every headline within the hour. Hashtags like #Kennedy crushed it, and #AOC burned started trending before the hearing had even ended. Political commentators were already choosing sides on cable news. Producers in the control room cut between shots of Kennedy calmly sipping water and AOC flipping pages without speaking. One anchor commented, "You can almost see the steam rising from her binder." But it wasn't just a gotcha moment. It was a masterclass in rhetorical timing. Kennedy had taken a swipe meant to humiliate him and reversed it in one sentence. He didn't need volume. He had precision. That, more than anything, left viewers shaken. In the hours that followed, talk shows broke down the moment frame by frame. Body language experts weighed in. "She was prepared for resistance, but not for silence followed by precision," one said. Online forums flooded with GIFs and reaction videos. Even comedians couldn't resist, with one late-night host joking. AOC lit the match, and Kennedy handed her the fire extinguisher with a note that read, "Nice try." It was brutal, but respectful, an art lost in most modern debates. Back at the Capitol, staffers recounted how the energy shifted after the hearing. "People were whispering about it all day," one aide shared.
I know.
"No matter how you felt politically, you had to admit he crushed it." AOC reportedly left the chamber quickly, declining post-hearing interviews. Kennedy, on the other hand, stayed, shook hands, and even made a few reporters laugh. "I didn't go in there to one-up anybody," he said, "but I sure wasn't going to sit there and be the butt of a punchline." The clip became the most watched political video of the week, even beating out presidential campaign ads. Analysts dubbed it the moment Kennedy became a household name, especially among younger viewers who had never paid him much attention. "It's like a grandpa with a dagger," one tweet read. Soft voice, sharp blade. And while AOC's base defended her, many acknowledged that this time she'd underestimated her opponent and overplayed her hand. By day's end, Kennedy had said only one more thing to the press. "I've been insulted by experts, Congresswoman." Ocasio-Cortez ain't one. That single line ensured the moment wouldn't fade quietly. It wasn't just a clapback, it was a lesson. And the country learned it live, without rehearsal. In 47 unforgettable seconds. That night, news outlets across the country dissected the exchange, One conservative columnist wrote, "Kennedy reminded America what wit looks like without rage," while a left-leaning blogger conceded, AOC met a rhetorical match and didn't see it coming. The confrontation wasn't violent or vulgar, but it cut deeper because it struck at pride, its confidence, and the very identity politics that often fuel the debate. It was a reminder that sometimes one sentence can outlast entire speeches. AOC didn't release a statement immediately, but her social media team posted vague tweets about patriarchy and smug Ivy Leaguers. Unfortunately for her, Kennedy wasn't smug, he was smooth, and that made it harder to paint him as the villain. He hadn't insulted her intelligence or raised his voice, simply used her own words as a springboard and landed a punch without ever tightening his fist. The internet had its verdict. Kennedy had owned the moment. Within 24 hours, even Saturday Night Live ran a cold open parody of the hearing, exaggerating AOC's confidence and Kennedy's calm roast. The skit went viral, pulling in millions of views. Political satirists joked that Kennedy had turned Southern shade into a weapon of mass deconstruction. Memes began popping up with Kennedy's face captioned, "If common sense were liquor." The line had become a catchphrase. Even high school debate teams quoted it. Meanwhile, Kennedy carried on as if nothing happened. He returned to his regular committee work, avoided celebratory interviews, and brushed off attempts to sensationalize it. "I said what I said," he told one reporter. "I've got more bills to read than tweets to answer." It was a nonchalant attitude that made the moment feel even more powerful. He wasn't performing, he was just responding. And that authenticity hit harder than any spin strategy AOC could throw back. Behind closed doors, however, Democratic aides reportedly urged AOC to let the moment pass and not escalate. It was a moment, one advisor told her. Movement. But AOC was reportedly frustrated not just at Kennedy, but at how quickly the public turned the tables. In her mind, she was speaking truth to power. But in execution, it came off as a misfire, an attempted takedown that boomeranged right back into her own chair. The incident was replayed in conservative ads, used as ammunition to rally younger voters around traditional wisdom. Even centrists began quoting Kennedy's comeback in podcasts and op-eds. They argued that political dialogue had become too loud, too chaotic, and Kennedy's calm but direct response had reset expectations. "Decency with daggers," one editorial titled it. His approach had touched a nerve with Americans tired of non-stop shouting and grandstanding. Ironically, Kennedy's biggest political win of the year wasn't a policy or a bill, it was a sentence. In that hearing room, under the fluorescent lights of a government building, he'd reminded everyone why words still matter. Not just the loud ones, but the deliberate, unexpected ones. It's the kind that make rooms go silent. The kind that stick. The kind you remember even after the headlines fade. AOC came with fire, but Kennedy brought flint. And though the media cycle eventually moved on, the clip of Kennedy's reply lived on. It was replayed at fundraisers, looped on talk shows, and sent in text messages between friends who hadn't even cared about politics. Kennedy's line had crossed into folklore not because of how loudly it was said, but because of how undeniably true it sounded. Even those who disagreed with his politics had to admit the man could speak, and when he did, people listened. In the end, AOC mocking Kennedy's law degree might have been just another jab in another hearing, but his one-sentence reply turned it into legend. It reminded everyone watching that cleverness, humility, and timing are still political weapons, and when wielded well, they don't just win arguments, they make history.